All right, with our white blood cells, the first white blood cells we're going to kind of concentrate on are going to be the granulocytes. And in terms of the granulocytes, we have neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. All right. And in terms of their function, each is going to be a little bit different. All right. We'll talk about the neutrophils first because the neutrophils are going to be the most common. They make up anywhere between about 55 to, it can go as high as 90% of your white blood cells. So if you're looking through a microscope, the most likely white blood cell that you're looking at statistically would be a neutrophil. And in terms of the neutrophil, all right, what you're going to look for in a neutrophil first off is it's going to have a lobed nucleus. Okay? And in terms of that, typically what you see with neutrophils, you'll see 3 distinct lobes. Sometimes it'll look a little U-shaped depending on morphology. But what's key, all right, with the neutrophil and what makes it a granulocyte is you're going to see some grains, some granules there within it. And in terms of the neutrophil, all right, I kind of think of these as your first responders because when you have something happen in the body that requires an immune response, the neutrophils are usually the first ones to get to the site, and part of the reason that they're going to be one of the main white blood cells or immune cells that are going to respond is because neutrophils are phagocytes, meaning they have the ability to undergo chemotaxis, meaning they can move in response to a signal. In this case, the signal is going to be something that is released by the bacteria. It's going to target that bacteria and engulf it. All right. On the website or on Blackboard, I have a video of a neutrophil that's chasing essentially a fluorescently labeled yeast cell. Really neat to watch. The neutrophils are my favorite of the white blood cells because of their ability to undergo phagocytosis. So essentially what they do is they can sense something that doesn't belong, they target it, they surround it, they engulf it, and then those particles that are within the neutrophil will digest that foreign particle that it engulfs. Okay, so I think neutrophils are really kind of neat. All right, their lifespan runs about 5 days, give or take. Okay, so the neutrophils are one of our agranulocytes. Our eosinophils are another. All right, eosinophils are a bit more rare. Typically anywhere from 1 to 6% of the white blood cells that you look at underneath a microscope are going to be eosinophils. All right, and eosinophils, in terms of their structure, are also going to have a lobed nucleus. All right, typically the eosinophils, it looks like it has 2 lobes. One of the key differences you'll have between an eosinophil and a neutrophil, other than the number of lobes on the nucleus, the eosinophil, and I'm going to do these in pink, have a lot more granules that stain with the dyes that are used to visualize the white blood cells. So in terms of that, in real life, the eosinophils aren't really pink as they're circulating through your body. but the stains that are used to distinguish the nucleus and the granules within the white blood cell do stain pink, all right? So eosinophils will look either kind of pinkish or reddish underneath a microscope. And in terms of the eosinophils, all right, these are a little bit unique, okay, in that they're going to target typically, let me write it down here, eukaryotic pathogens, all right? So most commonly, what eosinophils will target are parasitic worm infections, all right? So in terms of this, looking at someone's white blood cell count can give you an idea of what's going on in their body. If eosinophils are elevated, it's a potential indication of some kind of parasite infection, all right? Doesn't necessarily mean it's always a parasite infection, because eosinophils also have a role in allergies as well. I'm not going to concentrate on that right now, but be aware that they do have another role. But this can be a quick way that a blood test can screen for how healthy an individual is, because if they have an elevated eosinophil count, it can indicate a parasitic infection, okay? So in terms of that, the eosinophils typically are going to circulate for 8 to 12 hours in the bloodstream, but they have a longer lifespan if we go to tissues, okay? So these will kind of hang out in tissue and can function for as long as almost 2 weeks, all right? But typically circulating in the cardiovascular system about 12 hours, give or take, all right? I'm going to kind of write over here. We'll erase that. So that we can talk about our last cell type, the basophil, okay? Basophils, this one is the least common of all of your white blood cells, all right? So it's really rare to see these in terms of if you're looking at a slide of blood cells. It's approximately 0.5% of all of your white blood cells. Excuse me. And in terms of the basophils, they're going to be very different as far as their appearance. They're actually going to look, and I'm going to draw it as dots, very dark and very granular. Typically they'll have kind of a horseshoe-shaped nucleus, but sometimes the nucleus is really hard to see through all of the granules. So it can be picked out easily because it usually stains a very, very dark purple. And in terms of that, what you've got going on there with all of those dark staining granules. Oops. Let's get some spelling right. These are going to be loaded with histamines. And we're going to talk a little bit more about histamines a little later on, but histamines are part of the inflammatory response. They're part of the response essentially with the immune system that will recruit or bring in more immune cells. So the basophil, when it releases those granules, it signals to other white blood cells like neutrophils, eosinophils, or the white blood cell, or the other white blood cells that we haven't talked about, the lymphocytes. It signals that there's some kind of invading pathogen and they need to come to that particular site. All right. Histamines you may kind of have a feeling for because you may take antihistamines. Okay. Antihistamines prevent the release of histamines. You take antihistamines when you have allergies, because essentially what's happening with your immune system if you have allergies, and I suffer from this in the spring here in New Mexico every year because that dust starts blowing and stuff starts getting airborne. My immune system thinks those little particles that are coming into my system are pathogens. They're foreign. They're dangerous. All right? In reality, it's pollen, most commonly. It's not going to harm the body, but your immune system thinks it will. So it releases that response. That's what results in all of that mucus and fun stuff plugging your sinuses. That's why your eyes get red and watery, is because of the release of the histamines. It's bringing in more white blood cells, triggering essentially an immune response to something that's not pathogenic. All right? You want to have these released when you do have pathogens, because then it is bringing in the cell types it needs to clean up those pathogens. All right? In terms of their lifespan, the lifespan on the basophils are fairly short. Typically, they last a few hours, maybe a whole day. There's also a cell related to the basophil called the mast cell. And the mast cell is typically the one that's associated with the actual allergic response. Okay? So in terms of function, basophil are somewhat similar to eosinophils. They're not phagocytotic per se like the neutrophils. They release those granules, and those granules either work to digest the invading pathogen or they act as a signal to bring in more of our immune cells. Okay? So these are our granulocytes. If you have any questions, please let me know.